Okay, welcome back. So in the first three segments of the webinar, we've heard individually from our three panelists, from Kaitlin DeMarco from Locust Walk, Stasia Obremskey from women's health-focused VC firm, Foreground Capital, and then just now from Patric Stenberg of Gesynta Pharma, women's health startup focused on endometriosis. And for this last segment, we want to bring all of you together for an interactive discussion. So let's start with you, Stasia. As mentioned, you and Foreground Capital invested in Gesynta. There are other endometriosis companies out there. What attracted you specifically to Gesynta? How did that decision process work?
So I'm going to go back to a phrase that Kaitlin used, which I love, which is not first in human, first in class, but first in disease. And I would describe just the Gesynta opportunity as a first in disease. While there are other therapeutics in the market that treat endometriosis, we know that they are not able. This is a chronic disease, right, which affects women over their entire life cycle during their reproductive years, and yet the treatments out there can only be used episodically because they have such horrible side effects. So we really don't have any effective treatment for this disease. The second thing is we see a lot of assets in this space which just address pain, but don't really do anything about the underlying disease itself. It doesn't ameliorate any of the lesions. It doesn't, again, improve the pathology. It just addresses the symptom of pain. So I think when we saw this opportunity with Gesynta, there were several things we liked about it. First was the really strong safety package that had been developed because of the work, the previous phase 2 clinical trial that had been done. And so, that had been de-risked. Like, is this safe? Is this going to harm women? The answer to that, at least on the data that we've seen so far, is no. And then I think we saw a really strong preclinical package of an animal model. And again, in this disease in particular, animal models are complicated because not many animals have endometriosis. So you have to induce it artificially, and then you're not sure the response you're getting unless you're in non-human primates. And the company had gone to that effort to actually run a preclinical study in non-human primates, which developed some very compelling data, which was part of the preclinical data package. So I think it was recognizing the sort of unmet need, getting comfortable with the safety package, and then about a compelling preclinical data package that as you could have before you could actually run a phase 2 study on women. So I think those were the key things that really attracted us, in addition to the management team, which is always an important consideration in any of these investments.
Yeah, thanks, Stasia. And Patric, you already said, well, the investors do their due diligence on you, but as an entrepreneur, you should also look at your investors and if possible, choose them wisely. So, I mean, Stasia only recently joined your syndicate, but so can you speak about like some of the value add that you're expecting or already seeing from an investor like Foreground Capital?
Yeah, and I have to say, I have to protest here because she was not one of the most recent one joining the syndicate, but rather one of the first that said we're on. And I think that's value added number one, right? Because just having somebody taking the first step and say we're in, right? It adds tremendous value. I mean, I don't dare to say it with everybody here, but VCs are also, I wouldn't say herd animals, but it's very important because it sends a very strong message, which is better than just talking the talk, right? So I think that was very important to us. I think that was probably not number one, but that was the first thing that happened. The second thing which we realized only after was that Stasia knows everybody, right? So we had quite a bit of access to, I don't know how many, but there were many of the high, I would say the highest ranking VCs in the US where we found ourselves suddenly around the table discussing with these guys. And many of them, as was pointed out before today, many of them, while not being labeled as women's health investors, they pretty much all of them had teams which were dedicated to this space within the sort of larger fund. And that was also very valuable for several reasons. And one of the reasons, of course, was the ability to actually get access to that potential capital, but also, of course, to learn the thoughts of these investors, because obviously you have your pitch. You start with a pitch, but it develops over time. The investment case develops and gets more refined. The clinical study we're now running is not the same as we went out with 2 years earlier. It's a better study because it had been sort of discussed and turned upside down and inside out by many smart people, having experts joining them. So I think that was another, I would say, unexpected and very positive experience with the fundraising.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thanks. Kaitlin, so this is a success story of fundraising, but if we look around right now, it seems like we're heading into a more challenging financing environment. The markets are down and volatile. There's new challenges that are facing the pharma industry, tariffs and pricing pressure, and then potentially the FDA is sort of in some turmoil. So this will not make financing any easier for startup companies. What are your suggestions to companies that are going out in this current and future environment?
Yeah, it's definitely never too early to start the conversation with investors. I think, as was alluded to on this call, there are certain data points that investors like to see and strategic partners like to see. But you're not going to know if you don't ask the question and get your story in front of them in some cases. So continuing those conversations early on and not treating a raise like this big kickoff moment, but making sure you're communicating your timelines well in advance of kicking off your raise so an investor knows that it's coming.
Mm-hmm. Good. Kaitlin, while we're on the sort of discussions with investors, so we briefly touched on the topic of strategic investors, so pharma companies, medtech companies that invest in companies alongside financial investors. What is the role that these strategics potentially play, and how can entrepreneurs best leverage them in their financing process?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes, companies view this as one or the other. There are times where it makes sense to go out to both at the same time, depending on where you are in clinical development. And it could look differently. I mentioned earlier, it might not be a license for your asset. It might not be a company acquisition, but sometimes these corporate strategic partners do make equity investments. So be flexible, especially with market times, and explore all of your options.
Yeah, exactly. So I think corporate VC, that's where I was trying to get at. So these corporates would then invest alongside a financially motivated VC, and would they typically then expect something in exchange, or would they really be a passive investor like any other investor?
So it can
be passive. Sorry, you're not a passive investor. I would say you're not taking rights to the product at the time when you're investing.
Yeah, so it's definitely important to consider what terms come alongside that equity investment. There could also be an option to license, depending on certain milestones that are hit. So it could look different, but yeah, they do make equity investments.
Yeah. Okay. So I think maybe we'll do a final round of questions for each of you. Patric, maybe starting with you as a founder. You've interacted with lots of VCs over the years, over the last months. What is one thing that you would wish more venture capitalists did in their interactions with startups?
I think one of the things I appreciate most in the interaction part is when the VCs bring in experts, which they often do. The larger the VCs, the more experts you get to talk to. I actually appreciate very much when there is sort of a vivid discussion with the experts, and rather than through some other channel where you don't get to really you don't get the dialogue where you could actually engage and respond to certain queries. So I really appreciate those VCs that have like an open discussion back and forth with the experts, and that can also filter the views of the experts, not just take them for face value, because sometimes they get like an hour in the data room, they go through 3,000 documents and they need to say something very clever, and most often they do, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And that I appreciate, the sort of ability to interact in that process.
Got it. Thanks. Stasia, what is an example of a red flag that makes you walk away or maybe gives you pause in interaction with a startup company?
Oh, good question. I think having unrealistic expectations of how much time and how much money it's going to take to get your product from point A to point B. And, we love entrepreneurs because they're optimists by nature, but they also have to be realists. And so I think that's something that is a red flag. I think another red flag in the US context is I can't tell you how many pitches I've sat through, and at the end of it, my question is, who is the customer here? Because the U.S. healthcare market is very disaggregated, and sometimes you'll sit through these pitches, and I say to the entrepreneur, so who's paying for this? Is this the insurance company, the provider, the health system, the customer? So I think, and again, it depends on the business. I mean, this probably isn't relative to life science, but you need to be very clear, and within the first kind of 4 slides, you need to articulate in a healthcare sector, who is the customer and why is this a value proposition for them? So I think those are the 2 red flags for me. Really unrealistic expectations, and then secondly, not a clear articulation of who's going to buy this, who's going to pay for this in the context of certainly the U.S. healthcare setting.
Yeah, I mean, like for a fertility startup, it could be the patient, it could be the physician, it could be a pharma company, it could be the payer or the employer potentially, right? So I mean, I think for drug companies probably clearer, but okay, so trying to also see how this fits into the US as the largest market. Yeah, thanks, that's great.
I think that's especially true for companies that are outside the US to help understand how much they really understand the nuances of the US system.
Yeah, thanks. And Kaitlin, let's finish with you. What is a question that startups should maybe ask investors more often?
Yeah, it'd be great if startups would ask investors what their investment thesis is. I think Stasia alluded to, the different funds that they've invested out of have had different focuses over time. And it's probably not fair to assume that if you're looking at investments out of one fund, that's the strategy that will continue for the next. So really asking investors what they're looking for and making sure that your values are aligned and that you fit within that mandate.
Thanks. So that's great. I think that already brings us to the end of the panel discussion. Thank you so much to all of you, to Patric, Stasia, Kaitlin, for bringing your different perspectives to this webinar. So we'll wrap up this part and then move to the farewell. Thank you. And today's webinar is a perfect example of what Artemis Women's Health Foundation does. We bring together different stakeholders to accelerate innovation in women's health. This includes entrepreneurs, investors, and bankers like today, but it also includes doctors and patients. It may include academic scientists, regulators, health insurers, and importantly, the medium-sized and large healthcare companies that we talked about and that often will acquire or work with startups in bringing their products to the market in the end. So these pharma, diagnostic, and medtech companies play a key role in the ecosystem, and I want to again thank the partners of the Artemis Women's Health Foundation, Ferring, Gideon Richter, 𝗵𝘗𝘗, and Roche for supporting this effort. We have recorded this webinar, and you will find the videos in the Insights section of the Artemis website. And maybe you can bring on the final slide. And you can see here on the left-hand side a QR code. If you scan this, it takes you to our LinkedIn page. If you follow us on LinkedIn, you can make sure that you're aware of all the latest initiatives that Artemis is bringing to you. As mentioned on the website, you will find in the Insights section the recordings of previous webinars, including webinars that included other entrepreneurs that we interviewed before, as well as corporates in the women's health space. And if you would like to participate in future activities, we will send you occasional emails pointing out new events and publications. And with that, I would like to thank you for your participation. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.